Alverstoke Antiviral chats about what not to say to someone struggling with uncertainty. Meanwhile, we catch up with Fiona and we talk about that thing that's the opposite of marriage. You're watching Alverstoke Antiviral. Well, I am on my own today, sadly, but one of my most stupid critics, me, has written some questions to interrogate myself about Sunday's sermon. So, Andy, what was your sermon about? Well, that was a good question. We were doing Ecclesiastes chapter 11, weren't we? And that was about how we deal with uncertainty and uncertainty in our lives, which is something we need to recognize. The world is uncertain. That was point one, therefore try. And also moving on in the passage, life is vapor and youth is vapor, and therefore enjoy it for what it is. So that was the main thrust of the sermon in terms of helping people deal with uncertainty that hangs over us and paralyzes us. And the next question is, Andy, what would you say to someone who struggles with this kind of stuff? Surely telling them to calm down because the thing they're worrying about is merely vapor sounds a bit harsh. Yeah, and I think that's right. It could potentially be insensitive if someone is stressed out or upset or grieving or something. You say, oh, don't worry about it. It's just vapor. Everything is vapor and meaningless. And that can be a bit trite. And it's important we distinguish the teaching of the Bible from, say, beliefs we see in Hinduism and some forms of Buddhism about Maya. And this is an idea that the universe is an illusion and suffering is an illusion. And therefore, the goal of it is recognizing the illusion of life, and therefore you cease to care about it. And if you cease to care about it, you cease to suffer. That's the logic of a kind of Hindu Maya idea. And if we're not careful, we can look at Ecclesiastes and we can think that that's what the Bible says. Oh, it's all just vapor. Just don't care about this life. But that's not what the Bible says, is it? It says, mourn with those who mourn. There are valuable things in this world. This life is not totally irrelevant. Just because these things are not eternal and final and infinite in terms of their value, they do have a limited value. They do have a relative value. And that means we do care about the relationships we're in. We do appreciate the good things of this life and the good things of this world. And we are grieved when we lose them. And we are right to care about them. And that's a good thing. And I think the issue with Ecclesiastes is that unless we realize that these things are not ultimate, then there might be a danger that we overinvest in them and we treat them as if they were supposed to be eternally satisfying and they were infinite good rather than finite goods. And Ecclesiastes is here to remind us, no, remember, because of death and because time moves on, all things are vapor and therefore they can be enjoyed, but they are not ultimate, and we need to look beyond the things of this world, even life, even wisdom itself, to seek what is ultimate and lasting. And that, of course, is God and relationship with God. So it's all about trying to help people see that we're not supposed to turn things of this life into idols. We can care about them, we can be invested in them, but not as invested as we are in God. And we shouldn't be treating them as God and making them idols and treating them with idolatry and in God's place, because only God can bear the weight of expectations for our eternal satisfaction, our eternal hope. Only He is the one we can trust in. Only He will never change and will always be there for us. And so we need to trust Him and put our faith in Him and not in the things of this world, even though they are good and we can enjoy them. We are not to rely on them in the sense we are to rely on God. So what I'd say to someone is not simply, oh, don't care about them. I think it's right that we care and help people deal with the fact they do care about things of this world. I think that's entirely reasonable. But we need to recognize the value of their suffering and the reality of their pain, but point them beyond the things of this life. Point them to God. Remind them of God. Encourage them to take things to God in prayer. Maybe pray with them. Offer to pray for them. And say 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. And encourage us to look to Him as our eternal refuge and our eternal home and not the things of this world. I think that's what I'd say. Next question. What would you say to someone getting very worked up because they think something bad is going to happen, or can't be sure something bad won't happen? And this is an interesting question. What would you say to someone really struggling with uncertainty? Well, I think you can't really do better than that. Ecclesiastes verse 11, verse 5. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. You cannot understand the work of God. Often when we get upset about things, it's because we're trying to control things. It's about control, and we're trying to make ourselves safe by trying to be in control. And knowing is connected to control. Knowledge is power in some senses, isn't it? And if we're trying to predict the future or come up with fail-safe systems for what's going to happen and precautions, we're trying to secure the future by knowing it, and therefore control it, and therefore protect ourselves and not be exposed. And wisdom can do that up to a point, can't it? It's good to be wise, and we can be wise. But Ecclesiastes hits us with the counterbalance, which is wisdom is not watertight, and there will be times and there will be things which we cannot control, and we do not know. We do not know. And so we have to trust God with things, and we will have to live with some uncertainty, and we need to take these things to God, because God is the sovereign one. He is the one who knows all. He knows the future and determines the future, because he is sovereign, and we are the clay, not the potter. And in the same way, we are not the ones who know all things. We are known by God. He is the one who knows all things and controls all things. And I think Psalm 131 is really useful here, because the psalmist says, my heart is not proud. He says, I recognize there are things that are too wonderful for me. There's knowledge that is too wonderful for me to know, above my pay grade in terms of understanding this world. I don't need to understand it. I don't need to control it. Instead, he says, I have calmed and quietened myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. And that's the posture we should take. We should be like a child, depending on God, relying on him to know all things and control all things. And if we are getting stressed about the future, it might be because we're trying to control it, and we're struggling to give that to God and let God be God. And it's so tempting, isn't it? Because we like being in control, and we like trying to know all things and fix everything, but often we can't. In fact, the pagan system of magic, which you might have come across, as in real, magical belief systems that believe in sacrifices and magic rituals to control the universe, that's a form of trying to manipulate the divine to our will. I'll sacrifice this, or I'll do this so that the divine will then do this for me. It's a way of trying to control God. And the Christian worldview is very different. It says we can't control God. We can't give him a sacrifice to make him change his mind. It's only that he relates to us on the basis of his grace. And because of that, we have to let God be God, and we have to trust him with humility and not think we can twist his arm to do what we want. So that's what I'd say to that. One more question. Andy, explain to me again why Ecclesiastes isn't atheism. This is a good question, because we read the book and we see meaningless, and we think, oh, well, it's saying life is meaningless. That flows in the opposite direction to the message of the Bible, that there is meaning because there is God. And basically the answer to that is, well, you need to look at the structure of the book, because most of Ecclesiastes is the teacher talking in the middle section. There's like one verse at the beginning that introduces him, and then there's a little section at the end, an epilogue, which talks about him and says a conclusion. Now, here is the conclusion: fear God and keep his commandments. And that's because God will judge the world. And there are those bits which aren't in the teacher's voice at the start and the end. And everything in the middle is him. And some people would say, well, everything in the middle is wrong. It's atheist belief that there is no meaning. And then the end sort of corrects it and says, no, you need to fear God. And so the end of the book is against the main speaker. And I don't think that's the right view, not in the least, because the ending actually commends the teacher. It says he was wise and he set in order many proverbs. It's just he knows what he's doing. Also, if you read the middle of the book more carefully, you will see Ecclesiastes talking about the fear of the Lord. You will see encouragement to fear God. You will see encouragement, yes, to find joy. He's a preacher of joy, he's been called in some senses, but a godly joy, a joy that takes pleasure in eating and drinking and the wife of your youth and all these things, as recognizing that as a gift of God. And we especially see this at the end of the book as well, because there's this great bit at the end, chapter 12. I mean, we have it in our passage that God will bring these things to judgment, but we have God at the end in chapter 12. And the great verse, 12 verse 1, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the times of trouble come. And I went to a school where this was engraved on the roof of the chapel. So all the kids come in and sit underneath these words, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the times of trouble come. And then the poem goes on to explain, remember him before time brings you to old age and the time comes to die. No, actually remember God. It's a call to remember God and fear him as well as rejoice. That's the middle message as well. And that's not in conflict with the message about meaninglessness and vapor. It flows out of it. Recognizing the vapor leads us to fearing God. That's Ecclesiastes logic. I understand that's a little complicated, but that's basically where I end up in terms of reading Ecclesiastes. So that is the Sunday Reshoot. Well, I'm joined now with Fiona. Fiona, hello, good to see you.
Hello, nice to see you too, Andy.
Yeah, it's a miserable day outside, but I hope you're doing well.
Grim. Yes, chocolate and tunes have helped get me through today.
Tunes, oh.
Loud music, as in not the fruit sweets.
Oh, yeah. I see.
Yeah.
I was thinking I hadn't had a tune in so long. Anyway, how have you been doing, Fiona?
I've been hanging in there, bearing up, all those kind of phrases. I'm on half term at the moment, so that's a really nice relief. It's been quite frantic at school with a lot of changes to systems with the current situation. So yeah, I mean, I've managed, I've coped, but it takes a lot of energy, doesn't it? Change, and a lot more concentration. So that takes its toll after a while. So I'm very grateful for being part-time at this time, because I get a chance to recover. I feel for any colleagues out there who are full-time and having to deal with all this, because they don't have the give in the system like I do.
Yeah. Well, are you sort of dealing with the restrictions in terms of, are you able to see people much and catch up with friends and so on?
Yes, I am still able to, which is great. And I actually even joined a new class during this time, done a bit of ballroom dancing. Which you're able to do in a couple. You're isolated around the room, but obviously you do move. So that's been a lot of fun, actually. So that's been good to do.
Yeah, it's good to learn as well, isn't it? Because it's, it trains the brain, it trains the body.
The brain's been put through its paces.
Oh, right, okay.
But it's just nice. It's just nice to get out there and move to music. It's a really healthy thing to do, I think. And have a bit of a giggle with other people, even if you don't get that close. I just think, it's really nice to have that contact.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, are you feeling encouraged spiritually at the moment? And is there anything that's been encouraging to you or that's been on your mind that you've been thinking about recently?
The thing that's been on my mind recently has been the word perseverance. And the more I look around me, the more I see how much in life we have to simply persevere in so many areas, spiritually, physically, mentally, in all aspects of life. This characteristic of persevering and perseverance is just increasingly vital, it appears. And, you know, so often with not knowing at all where we're going. I mean, ultimately we have the goal spiritually about where we're going, but so often in life we can just be in situations where we just have to slog it out and persevere, and we can't imagine how anything good's going to come from it. You know, and we can't see the bigger picture. We can't see the end goal with a lot of, you know, things that we're going through. But incredibly, God brings things about that we really have had no clue about. And so, alongside perseverance, the importance of faith and trust and hope and love, you know, oh, I just see it more and more around me, you know, and I've been so glad when I've been able to persevere, that I have done so, even when it's felt ridiculous at times almost. And, you know, I've received advice to do otherwise from very well-meaning people. Yeah, and I just think at the moment, with the situation the world's in, perseverance is even more vital. But so is all the things that go alongside enabling perseverance to be possible. You know, the love of friends and family, words of encouragement. You know, it just shows me time and again how much we need our fellowship. Yeah, and need each other to enable that to happen. So I guess my thought is really hang in there, people, and keep encouraging each other, because we just don't know that one little thing we say, or one little, you know, little something that we barely even think about, can just be a lifeline for people. It has been for me in the past. And people probably never knew just how important what they said or did was to just keep me going. And I'm sure that must be the case for others as well.
Yeah. Do you know, I saw a pastor do a really brief, like 1 minute motivational video where he read a verse from the Bible. I can't remember what it was, but he basically gave like a 1 minute sermon. And he kept on saying, don't quit. You've got to keep going. Don't quit. And don't quit. Whatever you do, don't quit. Keep going. and it was, I think it was more about ministry, but it's so true in terms of, I mean, you know, Colin was preaching on Hebrews the other week, and the need to persevere and keep on with Jesus and not sort of drift away. And particularly when we're going through a prolonged trial, in the sense that, you know, this isn't a snap crisis. It's not over in time for tea. Everything's back to normal. Yeah, who knows how long this is going to go on, and the stresses and the issues that it causes will.
Yeah, and sometimes we go through one thing and it's followed straight by another, and then another, and you can just be thinking, my goodness, what? But my personal experience is, actually, there can be an end, and good can come out, and there can be unexpected joy. And none of it that I've engineered or planned. So I guess that's my sort of encouragement for people who are just feeling like they're just surviving, really. As you said, hang in there, keep going, don't quit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people would be delighted to pray that you would keep going and that you would persevere. Is there anything else people can pray about off the top of your head?
Well, Uganda's always in my heart very much. I've been informed recently that there's some horrid things happening out there, which I won't go into at the moment, but spiritually there's some very dark things going on in the country that needs our prayers. and also the usual suspect of corruption at the highest level and dictatorship means people who have worked hard all their lives out there are utterly destitute because they're not getting a wage or a pension or anything like that at the moment and are stranded, especially people in the education sector. So yeah, the school that I'm involved with, they've started to go back now. They've got 2-year groups back in, so that is some hope and encouragement there. So, and they're self-sufficient in vegetable production, so they're getting access to some food, which is great. We're looking at trying to develop a chicken project at the moment. Oh yeah. At some point, I'm going to be asking people to twin their chickens. I don't know how many people at our church have got chickens. But yes, chicken twinning is going to be a thing. Yes. But they do it for toilets. Why not chickens? So there we go. Yes, so if people could just keep that country in their prayers. They've got an election coming up in January, February. It's never pretty when that happens because dictators don't like to let go of power. So it'll be wonderful if there could be a turnaround. Malawi has seen a turnaround in their situation, which was nothing short of miraculous. So let's hope and pray there is positive change there.
Well, I'm sure people will be glad to pray for Uganda and for yourself and for each other as well. So Fiona, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
And now we are going to talk about our topic for today. And we are going to do a session on singleness. And the reason for this is the next book in our Bible run through is Isaiah. And you might know Isaiah has lots of chapters. And I really want to do it justice, but maybe not this week because I'm also doing things for Sunday. So because last time we did something on Song of Songs and the goodness of sex, I thought it would be wise to do something on singleness. Here we go. Because singleness is one of those topics which is, equally important that we talk about because the Bible talks about it as well. Where is my Bible? Is it over there? I can't find it. Oh, where's it gone? There it is. Yeah. So basically, Ecclesiastes talks about Ecclesiastes? No, the Bible talks about singleness, and yet often we don't. And not too long ago, I did a church day, and not a weekend, but just a day. I think it was a Saturday, called a Singleness Enrichment Saturday, which I was the speaker for. And it's one of those things where you don't often come across singleness enrichment events. You do come across marriage enrichment events and marriage enrichment weekends and so on in churches to help couples. But you don't come across very often singleness enrichment events. And I think that is because we do have a bit of a blind spot in churches, given how many single Christians there are, for one reason or another. And the Bible does address singleness, so we can talk about it. Side note before we start, single people, you can probably sense that even already there's a possibility in this discussion for single people to become a bit, aggrieved, affronted. We're the sort of overlooked, minority and everything's about marriage, and we can start to be a bit grumpy if we're not careful. That's not what we're going for today. God wants us to have humble, gracious hearts and not to sort of harbour resentment towards our married brethren. So let's try to tackle this without self-pity. I think that would be a healthy thing. Even though, as we see, singleness does bring with it some challenges, which we'll touch on. So here goes. Much to say. Point number one, singles come in many shapes and sizes. Singles come in many shapes and sizes. This is just an observation before we start, really. In the bucket labelled single people is a lot of different stuff. Often people are not single through choice. Often it's circumstances. Some singles are just people who've never been married and have always been single. Others have been married, but maybe they've been bereaved, maybe they've been widowed, maybe they've been divorced, maybe they've got kids, maybe they haven't. Some singles will marry in the future, other singles will never marry. Some singles want to be married, but can't for various reasons because they're unable to, be that circumstances, be that emotional issues, past experience. Some aren't attracted to the opposite sex. Some are attracted to the opposite sex, but can't seem to make it happen. Some want to marry, some really don't want to marry. Some would love to, but they can't find a partner. Some have found a candidate, but actually they can't work out how to get from A to B. Some choose to remain single for vocational reasons because of their work or their career, or they're in the mission field or working for security services, or they're Roman Catholic nuns or something. Some will choose to remain single for other reasons, like sort of anti-marriage feminism or environmentalism that resists the idea of human reproduction because too many children are killing the world. Some singles are content and happy. We need to remember that. Some are very much not. And some people are currently married, but one day they will be single. If you're watching this and you're married, you may end up single, unless you and your spouse happen to die at the same time, or you don't predecease them. So there's a lot of variety here, and hopefully you can think of other variations. Singles come in all shapes and sizes, and therefore, also because it's something you can come into and out of at different points in your life, there's a lot of variation, and it's risky to make assumptions about people. Oh, you're single, therefore this, therefore that. And we can tend to stereotype singles and see them in the ways our culture sees them. And I think there are two stereotypes which our culture has us see singles. The first is singles as pitiful. And you know this one. This is the sort of Bridget Jones scenario where, if someone asks you, are you seeing someone at the moment? And you say, well, no. Then they say, oh, I'm sorry. And they little arm rub. And the idea is, oh, that must be so sad for you, not being in a relationship. As if being single is a curse, as if it's the worst possible thing that could happen. And you see this in the movies, don't you? Where it's all about finding Mr. Right, or it's all about getting the girl and ending up with her. And it's almost a gospel of salvation from singleness to marriage. And singles are taught to see themselves as miserable victims, incomplete, unsatisfied, and then they get fulfilled in relationships. And that's coming from an idolatry about marriage and relationships, that they would ultimately satisfy us and would ultimately be the purpose of our lives. The other lens, not singleness as pitiful, is singleness as superior. And in church history, sometimes this has risen to the surface, and Christians have come down on one side or the other with, particularly in the monastic movement. There's lots of thoughts about celibacy and singleness as a higher level of being. And you also get it in the culture. So there's a feminist counter-reaction to the idolatry of marriage that says, I don't need a man to complete me, which is true. And marriage and all that is harmful and oppressive and outdated, which is not so true. And therefore people say singleness is better, just be free, cast off the chains, because that is a superior life. And there are male versions of this too, where men walk away from relationships with women and aspire to a kind of James Bond singleness, where you've got your work and you're unattached and there's no sort of baggage, and you're a careerist, but you're also promiscuous and lots of relationships, but no family, no purity, no godliness, no marriage. And we see both of these messages, one in saying go for it and be single and be James Bond, basically, and another saying, singles, you're pitiful, aren't you? You're suffering and victims and terrible in your situation. So that's how we're tempted to look at singles. What does the Bible say? How would the Bible help us think about singles? Well, it wouldn't take those views. The first thing we need to see is just something very foundational, and that's this. Life is about Jesus. Life is about Jesus, not about singleness or marriage. You see, the Bible isn't primarily about you. We wanted to make it all about ourselves, and we want everything to, cash into our lives and our situations and our needs. Actually, the Bible says the center of the universe is not you and your desires and your plans and your situation. That's all cast in perspective by looking at what is the main thing. And I'm going to read out some words from Revelation chapter 5. So just have a listen to these words from Revelation chapter 5. And this is one of these great apocalyptic passages that talks in picture imagery about what is really at the center of the universe. Revelation 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept, because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside it. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and the 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. So what's going on there? Well, we're in the throne room of the universe, the throne room of heaven itself, and God is there, seated on his throne. And there's a scroll which has, as we'll see in the next chapters, if you read on in Revelation, opening the scroll brings about the events leading to Judgment Day. So it's the scroll of God's plan for history. It's the scroll of the future, the scroll of the direction for the universe. And no one can open the scroll except one person. And it culminates in this vision. There is one person who can bring about God's purpose for history. And that is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who is also a root, who is also a lamb. And you see that in verse 6. And all these images are stacked on top of each other. And it's talking about Jesus, right? He's the lion, he's the conquering king animal, and yet he's also the lamb who has been slain, who has laid down his life in sacrifice. And look where he is in this verse. He is standing at the center of the throne, God's throne, and the lamb is at the center of the throne. And what happens when he takes the scroll is everyone reacts like this. This is verse 9. When he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." So there's this song celebrating what is at the center of the universe, and that is Jesus taking the scroll, bringing about God's plan, because he was slain, and with his blood, which was shed for our sins, he has purchased people for God and bought us out of our slavery to sin and made us God's people. Look at verse 10. You've made them a kingdom and priests to serve our God. He's given us a purpose and a vocation to be God's people, to reign on the earth. That is what it's all about. And the chapter goes on praising Jesus. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them, saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen," and the elders fell down and worshipped. It's a wonderful picture of the universe united in praise and focus on Jesus and God and what he has done to save us. That's what matters most. Life is about Jesus, knowing Jesus, being saved by Jesus, and responding to his rescue by serving him. Why are we saying this about singleness? Because unless this piece of the jigsaw is there in our minds, life is about Jesus, we will get singleness wrong. We will do it wrong. And we will get marriage wrong if we're married. We'll do that wrong because we'll get them totally out of proportion. And we'll think our relationship status is our defining feature of our lives and being, and we'll put it at the center potentially. And the Bible says, no, Jesus. Jesus is at the center. Get him as number one. Here's what Keller says about singleness. He encourages people to, quote, demote marriage and family in your heart, put God first, and begin to enjoy the goodness of single life. Because basically, the first thing we need to do is get clear that life is about Jesus. That's the first thing. Life's about Jesus. Second thing, singleness and marriage are different gifts. Singleness and marriage are different gifts. Now, I'm not saying these are spiritual gifts. Those of you floating around that there is something called the gift of singleness, which is a sort of super spiritual endowment which enables people to go through singleness without struggling. And if you're single and you're finding it difficult and you've got, temptations to lust or envy or struggling with loneliness or whatever, then, you haven't got the gift of singleness. You should go and get married. And if you're married and you're finding it difficult, maybe you haven't got the gift of marriage. Maybe you should go and become single again. And perhaps you can see already the problem there. With singleness and marriage, they are different gifts, but they're not gifts in the sense of a supernatural ability to be married and really enjoy it, or be single and really enjoy it. No, we all have struggles and we all have difficulties. And in the context, when Paul calls them a gift, he says, I wish that you all were as I am, meaning single, when he talks about them trying to abstain from sex in marriage. And he's saying, no, couples, keep it going. There will be plus sides if you were all single as I am. But he says, each of you has your own gift from God. This one has that gift and that one has the other. And in context, what is this gift? It's not a super spiritual empowerment. It's a life situation. Because he goes on to say, each person should live as a believer. This is 1 Corinthians 7. In whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was the man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not become circumcised. Later he says, were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although, if you can gain your freedom, do so. So you're free to change your situation. But he says, well, these are life situations we find ourselves in. And there's merit in sticking with what you've got and cracking on there. And he applies this to singleness. And just have a look at this text. He says, now about virgins, talking about the unmarried, he says, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. And that verse there, 28, is one of those wonderful verses which I have never heard preached at a wedding. I would love to be at a wedding where they preach, those who marry will face many troubles in this life. But Paul is honest about that. We'll come back to that in a sec. First thing to note is that he's saying that I have no command from the Lord. There's no rule about whether you need to get married, whether you're single. There's no command to get married. It's an area of freedom. And he says, 28, if you do marry, you've not sinned. So you can marry, you can date if you want to. In the same way that, if you're in a slave situation and you can get your freedom, you can get your freedom. You can change your life situation depending on your circumstances. But he does also say, I think it is good for a man to remain as he is. He says there are benefits for being single. It's not wrong to desire marriage. It's not wrong to pursue marriage. But the big thing is that we crack on serving Jesus because he saved us. And that means there are advantages to both singleness and marriage. And there's an advantage to singleness. We don't often hear this. And we see it here in the end of verse 28. Those who marry will face many troubles in this life. And I want to spare you this. One of the downsides of marriage is that it comes with marital concerns. You have to work at the marriage. You have to invest time in each other. You have to, keep the relationship going and work at it. And if you have a family with children, you've got a lot to do there, haven't you? Some of us will know what I'm talking about. There's, by the way, if you're a single parent, I don't know whether this is talking about you, because in your situation, you have family concerns, don't you? You have family dependence, but you just don't have a spouse if you're a single parent. And so there's that issue, isn't there, where I think biblically you're probably in a category closer to a widow with family dependence but no spouse, rather than the virgin he's talking about here, who is someone who is yet to marry at all and has no marital concerns. So if it doesn't quite fit your situation, don't be fazed by that. But he is saying, for those who don't have marital concerns and are single, he says, you can be spared the marital concerns, because one of the great advantages of marriage that married people can do that single people can't do is obviously picture Christ and the church as they love each other and submit and all that jazz. You can obviously invest a lot of time in your relationships with your children and each other to help each other follow Jesus and point each other to Jesus, because the husband is to present his wife to Christ as a virgin. There's a responsibility there spiritually for your family. And because of that responsibility, married people have stuff to do that people without family concerns don't. So you've got to pick the kids up from school, and you've got to take them to band practice, and you've got to clean the muck off their shoes, and you've got to extinguish the curtains when they've set them on fire, and you've got to tell the kids off for setting the curtains on fire, all that jazz. There's a lot of stuff to do. And that's why Paul is so positive about those without family concerns remaining single here, because he's saying, I have no command from the Lord to do this. There's no rule, but there's a benefit to staying single. It's good for a man to remain as he is, he says. And he goes on to say, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord, but a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. Let's be honest, families do put some limits on you. Limits that bring benefits as well, but also limits. And so much good is done for the kingdom of God through single people who aren't busy with that kind of stuff. It's true for our church. It's true for a lot of churches. It's true for world mission. Lots of single people have taken the gospel to the world. It's true everywhere you look. Single people have a capacity we can devote to serving. And it's not always as simple as saying singles have more time. Some singles are very busy people. They may not have more time depending on what they've got on. But if they don't have family concerns, then, there is a freedom from family concerns there that the married have. So we've got two different streams we can go in. And both these are ways of serving God, because he's purchased us by the blood of Jesus, and he's made us to serve him. We saw that before. And like lanes on a motorway, you can be in the single lane serving Jesus, and you can be in the married lane. And both can be enormously wonderful for serving God. They bring advantages and disadvantages. Look at someone like Paul, who says he was unmarried in this chapter, and all the good he did, and the help he brought to many people. Look at people like John Stott, for instance, who had a wonderful impact for God in this country. And you'll be able to think of many people who've helped you and pointed you to Jesus and served you, who are unmarried and don't have those family concerns and have used their singleness to help other people. And we need to thank God for these people and encourage them and pray for them and not treat them as if they're sort of spare parts or abnormal, because the gospel is not get married. The goal is know Jesus, become like Jesus, serve Jesus. And, if we're praying for a spouse for someone more than we're praying that they would be Christ-like, then that's probably an indication that our priorities are a bit askew, because marriage is not the point of life. There's a good quote from a guy called Al Shi, quoting someone called Ed Young, and he says this: marriage is not an end, it's a beginning. It is not a destination, it is a method of travel. If marriage is one method of travel, singleness is the other. If we decide to marry, we are not arriving at a destination, we are simply exchanging one gift for another. One method of travel for another. And we must not believe the myth that marriage is flying first class while singleness is traveling by bus. So singleness and marriage are different gifts for serving Jesus, with different perks, but also they each have their own set of challenges. And this is the third and last point, or fourth point even. Singles may face a number of issues along the way. And I'm just going to flag a few of these up, sort of to raise awareness so we know what to pray for each other, potentially, and also so we know how to love and serve and encourage others who are single. And we can do that as single or married people. Number one, feelings of failure. Singles can experience feelings of failure. And into this goes a general sense that there's something wrong with you. So listen to this quote from Kate Wharton. She says, there was once an article in the Daily Mail where a single woman bemoaned the trials of food shopping for one. She said this: supermarkets are obviously designed by married people for married people. If you fancy some mange tout for your supper, you must buy enough for a week. Packs of vegetables sit on the shelf, glowering at you. Society's silent approach for your failure to find a partner. We can laugh at that, but actually we've all been there, and it can sometimes feel like a bit of a conspiracy. Now, I think I did laugh when I read that the first time, that it's a bit of an overreaction to get upset about vegetables on the shelf in the supermarket. But there is a possibility that we slip into this mindset, isn't there? Single people can feel like we're failures, and everything is a painful reminder that we're not as we should be. And, you know, that could be exacerbated by, well, vegetables. It can be exacerbated by a number of things, and a lot of other things, such as, I don't know, careless comments people make. You know, oh, you're so lovely. How are you still single? What are you suggesting there? Oh, don't worry. You've still got time to find a spouse. Still, as if life is a quest to get married. Do you see? What was the other one? Oh, you're still single? Oh, don't worry. Well, Jesus is your husband. Gloriously true, but if said tritely, that could actually be quite unhelpful, couldn't it? Because it suggests we don't recognize they might be very dissatisfied and struggling. And then there's parental pressure, there's peer pressure, there's people labeling you as single instead of treating you as a human being, as an individual. You know, that can lead you to be demoralized and bitter and even quite covetous about marriage. You know, remember, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, says Exodus. And, you know, I think that can be a temptation for singles, to feel like we're failures and therefore respond in this way. And so I think everyone just needs to be a little vigilant. You know, single people need to be alert that we don't slip into this way of thinking. And we also need to be careful not to contribute it to others and make them feel implicitly or otherwise that they are on a sort of losing path in life. So, feelings of failure. Secondly, issues of aloneness. Obviously, freedom from a marriage and marital concerns means that singles may well feel very alone. And obviously, married people can feel alone as well. But there are some practical issues that come with being single. For instance, flat pack furniture. I found that when I tried to put my wardrobe up single-handed, and I didn't have enough hands. I had two hands, and I needed someone to hold it in place while I slotted something in. And it was quite difficult to do that alone. It's difficult to drive long distances when there's no change of driver and it's all on you. It can be difficult going on holiday or planning a holiday if you're alone. Some people love it, the backpacking type, but you know, others may find it really difficult and may really appreciate being invited on holiday by families because you've got someone to go with and you're not going to sit in a hotel room alone. It can be hard to, you know, turn up to parties alone. And some of these things are emotional issues as well. It can be really helpful if there's a friend there to sort of go with you. people can struggle with lack of touch and physical affirmation. And of course, as well, there can be struggles with emotional isolation, a lack of intimacy, a lack of deep friendships. And there is a great book, actually, which points out that marriage is not the answer to the human need for intimacy. No, intimacy is something we can all enjoy if we have people who we can be open with, and we can be honest with and real with, and, you know, offload to and talk and enjoy each other's company. And actually, friendship is really important, where we can be open with each other and we can know each other and be known. And I think that's a great resource that will be very, very helpful in dealing with some of these issues of aloneness. You know, we all need friends, and, you know, married people need friends too, actually, because your spouse is not meant to bear the weight of your entire friendship circle. You know, we need each other, don't we? So yeah, there are these issues of aloneness, and just an encouragement: singles, don't sit around and wait for people to come to you necessarily. You know, you can do things as well. You can, if you're feeling lonely, resist the urge to sit in the same place. You know, see if you can do something about it. Invite someone over, make a phone call, see what you can do, and see if you can reach out to someone else. And you may well find that helps you. Phone a friend, as it were. So there are these issues of aloneness, and I'm not saying everyone will experience all these issues. I'm just flagging up generally what might be an issue that we might need to be aware of. Lastly, issues around relationships. If you're single, people tend to assume singles want to get married and are free and able to get married. And some people are, and some people aren't. And this can lead to things like setups and matchmaking, and people trying to introduce you to people making careless comments. Please tread carefully here. I don't think love life should be a taboo topic, because, you know, we need to discuss that kind of stuff. Otherwise, all, you know, singles' inner life and feelings and thoughts all goes undiscussed, unprocessed, unacknowledged, and that can be difficult. No, it's good to talk about, but ask a single person how they're feeling. And ask a single person, you know, don't assume they will want to be set up. Don't assume that they will be able to start a relationship, although that would be a good idea, you know. And don't assume that things are, you know, all easy for them. You know, I was in a church service once where it was the 15th of February, and someone started the service by saying, "Well, good morning. Did everyone have a good Valentine's Day yesterday?" Or something like that. And I thought, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't. All these people here, married people, some of whom may have issues in their marriages, single people who may not have had a good Valentine's Day. That's not very sensitive, is it? And there's an assumption there that we all love Valentine's Day and that's for everyone. And, you know, it's not. So just be careful of assumptions in issues around relationships. We can talk about these things, and it's good to talk about these things. But just be wise and remember the stuff in Proverbs about speaking carefully and listening, and all that kind of stuff. Lastly, singles, let's try and be gracious around all these things as well. You know, if someone upsets you or treads on a toe or, you know, makes you feel inadequate or something, let's not be bitter and self-pitying. Let's be gracious, because God calls us to be humble and gracious and kind and forgiving. And hopefully, as we make Jesus the big center of our lives and we cease defining ourselves by our singleness, that should help us to become more and more sensitive to these things. Well, less, did I say more sensitive? I meant less sensitive to those things and more concerned about Jesus. Don't let these wants and desires for marriage, for children perhaps, you know, these are not bad things to desire at all. It's not wrong to want them, but don't let them control you. Don't let them consume you. Don't let them define you and embitter you if they're not satisfied, because they're not the be-all and end-all, are they? Jesus is the be-all and end-all. And it won't be long before we're with him. So that's all I've got to say really on the topic of singleness. All that remains to be said is stay close to Jesus and wash your hands.